Hello, and welcome to MIT Sloan Alumni Online. Every month, MIT Sloan Alumni Online brings you the latest breaking news, cutting-edge research, groundbreaking ideas, and school updates from MIT Sloan faculty and alumni. Today, we are pleased to have Meghan McCormick, MBA class of 2018, joining us. Meghan McCormick started her career in the Peace Corps, working as a community economic development volunteer in the Republic of Guinea, West Africa. During her service, she was confronted by the destructive force of high youth unemployment rates, a problem she has dedicated her career to solving. Meghan is the founder and chairman of Dare to Innovate, Guinea's first social business accelerator. Today, the organization is one of the most active seed funders in French-speaking Africa and works with organizations such as the United Nations, the World Bank, and USAID to develop programs that enable employment through entrepreneurship. In 2017, Meghan spun Aeiou out of Dare to Innovate, creating a mission-driven, for-profit startup. Aeiou is a mobile platform that empowers small business owners to make data-driven decisions to improve their performance and access financing. Meghan is a former management consultant and is currently an MBA candidate at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. She holds an MBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management and a BSBA from Georgetown University. Meghan, thank you for being with us today. I will turn it over to you, but first maybe you could give us a sense of how you got started using design thinking and human-centered design with the Peace Corps and your companies, both Dare to Innovate and Aeiou.
Design thinking is about empathy, it's about exposure, it's about tools and frameworks, but it's something that's accessible to everyone, whether you have a degree or you live in a rural part of a remote country in poverty in West Africa. These human-centered design is truly human, and we're all capable of bringing it into our work. After the Peace Corps, I kept running Dare to Innovate nights and weekends, but joined Dublin, which is the innovation strategy group at Monitor Deloitte. And here was, I think, where I truly developed my expertise in design and design thinking as an innovation strategist, applying these tools and processes to Fortune 50 companies around the globe. I particularly worked a lot in B2B innovation in the industrial space, but also worked for the government, pharmaceutical companies, and in financial services. It was during this time that Dare to Innovate went from a small organization having funded 7 startups to a larger scaled organization that had more than 50 investments in our portfolio, and started to really struggle with the problem of how do we help these small businesses grow at scale? Because doing it one business at a time and investing individuals into each small business was something that we knew we could make a difference in the lives of a couple of people, but not have the type of scaled impact that we were hoping for. And that's really where Aeiou came into being. I started researching it right at the beginning of my time at Sloan, and then actually launched our beta into market this past April. So the question you're all probably asking yourself is, what is human-centered design? And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's putting human beings in the center of the problems and also in the center of the solution. So how I like to think about design thinking is as a repeatable process for innovation. If you go through these steps, if you keep an open mind, if you keep a problem-solving approach and empathy, then you're doing design thinking without even realizing it. I think what truly sets it apart from the type of innovation that we're used to at a place like MIT is we say, this is a problem that someone is facing. Now let's figure out with them a way to solve it. Where a lot of the innovation that we see, especially in the technology space, is we have this new technology, it makes batteries smaller, or it does X, Y, or Z. Now, what problem can we go out and solve with this technology? So whereas human-centered design is a problem-first, human-first process, normal technical-driven design, research and development is a technology-first process. I've seen this go awry in many ways. I've seen companies be really excited about groundbreaking research and technology that they've come out with and then never be able to sell it never generate a single dollar of revenue from it, because the technology that makes you excited in the lab needs to also make someone excited out in the field. So really don't think about what you want to do, but what you want to solve. And so now that you know a little bit about what it is, I think the next natural question is, how can you apply it? How can you use it in your daily life? As with any sort of process or toolkit that is trending upwards, practitioners to make it seem a lot more complicated than it is, because it protects themselves from people just figuring out and doing it on their own. So you might, when people talk about design thinking, see a map like the one I have up on the screen right now, which is true. These are all components of design thinking, but we're going to simplify it down into the core components that really matter. So a design process has 4 main pieces to it. The first is discover and then define. This is all about trying to figure out what exactly is the problem that you're trying to solve, who is feeling this problem, how is it manifesting. And then the second half is develop and deliver. And this side is really about the solutions to the problem that you're having. The double diamond isn't just shaped this way because it looks nice. It actually mirrors the process that you'll be going through. So during discover, you want to be opening your aperture, bringing in more knowledge, more information, more experiences. And then during define, you collapse it down into a key problem statement that you're going to solve. In develop, then you're back in brainstorming mode. So you have a problem and then you try to think of hundreds and thousands of solutions to it. And then when you get back into deliver, it's about combining everything that you thought about and develop into one cohesive solution that you can actually bring to market. So for the session, I'll really be starting with an introduction of a design concept. So we'll go through each one of those 4 stages and then talk about exactly how we are applying it at Aeiou to hopefully give you a sense of what these practices look like actually out in the field. And before we get into it, I just want to give you a slight overview as to what Aeiou is, so that when I talk about our case study, it makes more sense. So Aeiou is a mobile platform. Right now, it's an Android app that is designed to help small business owners make data-driven decisions so that they can improve their performance. Small business owners in emerging markets generally, but especially in West Africa, they're not really keeping good records. And if they are, they're writing them down in these cash books, these paper notebooks. And they don't know how to take that data in the notebook and turn it into something of value so that they can make better decisions with it. So what Aeiou does is collects that transaction data, aggregates it across all of our users, and then analyzes it in context to push back recommendations in plain language to our users. And we see the thread, this transaction data, as kind of the thread that binds the ecosystem players together. And so using those insights and using that data, we can actually connect them to financial institutions to get loans, to new customers who we think will like their products, to lower cost suppliers, et cetera. So we're digitizing the small business economy in West Africa, specifically in Ghana. But we didn't start with a question asking ourselves, how can we make a digital accounting solution, or how can we digitize the ledger book? But really with the question of, why do small businesses stay small? I would say this is your jumping off point into the design process, and is the most important thing that you will do in the whole pursuit of design thinking. You don't want it to be so narrow that a solution is actually part of your problem. This is something we all fall into because we all think that we know what the solution is going to look like. You want it to stay so open that, not so open that you don't know where to start looking for your discovery, but open enough that the person the stakeholders who are involved could be different people. The solutions could be technical or non-technical. They could be products or services. And so really think about, what is bugging you? What are you trying to fix, do, change, or learn that is compelling you to learn this new process and apply it so that you can create a solution? So to dive right into discover is really research. So desk research is definitely a part of it. You have to understand who are the key players in your ecosystem. You have to understand the nuances of the industry. But really what sets design thinking apart is its use of primary research or ethnography. We could spend weeks talking about different ethnographic research techniques. So I just really want to give a highlight of some of the most often used and most powerful tools that you can use. The most common is the long form interview, where you actually write out an interview guide. We typically have them be about 2 hours, where you start with open-ended questions and then slowly wheedle yourself down into the real specifics of what you're trying to learn. So when we're talking to small business owners about record keeping, we'll say to them more, what are your dreams for your children? Or what do you want this business to look like in 5 years? Rather than how much money do you save each month and what do you spend that money on? Eventually we can get to those questions, but it's not where we start. We also, observation is also a really key part of this, because people are trained to tell you, someone who says, I'm coming in from MIT or from this company, they're trained to tell you what you think, you want to hear. And so observation is really critical. To give an example, I had some colleagues doing research in Mexico about snacking and food behavior. And they did the research in context within the living room of one of their research participants' houses. And this mother was sitting there saying, my children don't eat between meals. Occasionally when they do, it's a piece of fruit. And out of the corner of their eye, the researcher could see her children climbing up onto the countertop, opening up the cabinet and sitting there eating chips. And this observation you would never get if you were doing this in one of those kind of market research offices that you see like near airports, off highways. After any observation or activity or research interview, you need to have a structured debrief. So we use different worksheets and we sit around. Typically we try to have 2 people in every interview or every observation so that we can really talk about it and lay out what are the most important things that you learned, but also what other questions have surfaced. One of the frameworks that I like to use is called the Aeiou Framework. It's easy to remember because it's just vowels, but what it stands for is the activities that you saw the person doing, the interactions that they had, the objects were there, different users in the space, and the actual environment that it was in. And so it's just a way for you to make sure that you're not just writing verbatim what you heard, but you're taking a moment there to also do some analysis. To quickly go through the last 2, analogies are looking at someone who's trying to solve a similar problem as you, but in a completely different space or a completely different world or time period. The most famous example of this is that when Apple was going to create their retail experience, they studied concierge services at luxury hotels. So when you think about going to the Genius Bar in an Apple store, you might not have thought, oh, this feels like a hotel, but the way you even approach the counter and where the counter is located in relationship to the entrance of the store is very much mirroring what you would see in a luxury hotel. And then the last bit is activities. I think the place where you can learn the most is when you're actually not asking people to tell you things, but you're watching them do things. So I'll make that a bit more concrete in 1 minute. So this is me doing research with one of our users. His name's Kobe, and he's a barber, and we're sitting in his barber shop, and he was telling me about how he kept records in the past. Instead of just letting him tell me about record keeping, because everyone wants to say, yes, of course, I keep good records, I actually had him bring out the tally sheet that he was using to record revenue. So you can see in the picture, that's what he's showing me there. You can also note in the picture that we're sitting very close. I have a notebook open, we're sitting next to each other. So you want to keep it very informal, and you never want to have the screen open in front of you, creating a barrier between you and the person you're doing research with. This is an example of observation. So we wanted to learn about transparency and trust in financial institutions in Africa. And so we went out to a village about an hour and a half and actually sat in, didn't say anything, didn't intervene, but just watch these individuals at the community level operate their own village savings and loans association. And there'll be aspects of this process that we actually bring into our app down the road. For analogies, we studied Uber because Uber was the strongest example we could find in our region where individuals saw their smartphone as a tool to make money and not just a tool to have fun and go on WhatsApp. And so we did a lot of research and observation with Uber drivers, trying to understand what was that process that got them to hear about Uber, trust Uber, go through the whole process, and then start earning on the app. And then finally, this is what I was talking about with activities. This is a game that we created. It's called Start Up the Game. And it's designed so that no one ever makes it to the finish line. And the idea here is to learn from the participants what milestones are in businesses and their context. But then even more importantly, understand the emotional response to hitting milestones and also backtracking or hitting roadblocks, because in this game, anytime you roll an odd number, you actually have to move backwards. So that's Discover. Once you collect all of those observations, weeks of research and learning, you need to make something out of it. And that's what Define is about. So it's synthesizing the research you've done over the past period and putting it in a way that allows you to move forward from it. So you start with observations, which are oftentimes just pulled out of your debrief sheet, and then you group them into themes. And within these thematic clusters, you can pull out insights. If you have thought about design thinking in the past, the image of clustering and sticky notes and Sharpie markers, that's likely coming from this define phase. Once you have your insights, kind of the key takeaways is design principles. So these are, we like to write them actually up on a sheet of paper and keep them on the wall. These are things that no matter, it may be 6 months since you've done your design, but every time you're thinking about a new feature, you go back and say, is this respecting the design principles that we laid out during research? And then how might we statements, which really become your starting off point for brainstorming concepts. So this is what our wall of our Airbnb looked like. It's actually even cut off a bit after our 3-week research program in Accra. You can see in the middle a light switch to give you a sense of scale. So throughout the week, we were writing down what we saw, what we heard, what we noticed, what we were told. And then over the course of the week, started getting it all up on the wall, thinking about it, reflecting on it, and then actually brought in small business owners and entrepreneurs from Accra to do the thematic clustering and do different activities with us to pull out insights. I think this is critical because especially when you're designing for someone who is not you, when your end user is different than yourself, it's important to not just have them be passive participants in the research, but actually active participants in the definition of the problem statement and the creation of the solution. So here's just some examples of what came out of our research program for Aeiou. So I think one of my favorite observations was we heard again and again in different words, you need to feed the map. And this was the concept that Google Maps was new to Ghana. And so there weren't a lot of different locations actually put into the map. So individuals who were heavy users of the map, like Uber drivers, actually felt a sense of responsibility in populating that tool. So that was an observation that we had, that it's really critical in the way that we think about creating a map of economic activity in a city. One of our key insights was that decisions and actions are not personal. There's a lot of guilt and fear around individual success. And so when people are setting themselves up for success, they like to think about what that's going to do for their community, or at least they like to say about what that's going to do for their community. One of the design principles that came out of our research was that Aeiou needs to feel like a relationship. So people don't want to receive messages from it. They want to be able to interact back with Aeiou, and they want it to feel very personal. So we actually created a persona called Aeiou Coach, who's delivering all of these insights in a conversational manner and who business owners can respond to and actually see pictures of. All of us respond to it, but we actually have one person who technically is the Aeiou Coach. And then led to how might we statements. So how might we create mechanisms that allow us to celebrate the different achievements of our business owners? How might we humanize our analysis? So after the research, this document that I pulled these from is actually about 15 pages long and really guided our work in the subsequent months and year. So once you kind of have your how might we statements, it's time to brainstorm solutions to those how might we statements that actually will become what you deliver into market in the end. So develop is about building business concepts. An easy way to think about what a concept is, because you need to hit a sweet spot where there's enough of a structure around it that it is something, but at this stage you don't need to know like 5 years from now this will be our revenue projection and our margins are 17% or whatever. So I like to think of we will achieve X by doing Y and we'll make money by Z. If you're doing a nonprofit, you can say, and we will be financially sustainable because of Z, or we'll make impact because of Z. So if you think about the Uber concept, it's we'll increase accessibility to private rides by making every car a taxi, and we'll make money by charging drivers a percentage of the money they earn. Or if you think about Sloan, we will educate principled, innovative business leaders by providing a holistic management education, and we'll make money by charging tuition. So you can keep it very, very high level at this stage, but you should have an inkling of business model. You should know what you're trying to achieve, and you should know how you think you're going to achieve it. And unstructured brainstorming definitely has a role in all of this, but structured brainstorming, I think, is even more powerful. So this is the business model canvas. If you Google it, you'll find 1,000 examples of it. So when we're building out concepts to move from the we will achieve X by doing Y and make money by Z, we actually start trying to fill in a map such as the one here with Post-it notes so that it can stay flexible. We can move things and change things. But that's when you start kind of building up the meat, and it starts sounding less of kind of that idea you write down on a napkin late at night and more of something that could turn into a business plan. So ours is that we will help businesses grow by providing insights and encouragement. I'm clearly missing the third part of this statement because actually at this point in the process where the picture is from, we weren't quite sure how exactly we're going to make money. One of the tools that we used in order to build our concept was actually storyboarding. So me and my research partner drew out using this 5 E's framework, drew out what exactly we thought someone engaging in our process would look like. So we started with entice, enter, engage, extend, and exit. So we each drew one of these papers, and then we presented them to each other. And it turned out, and this is, I think, very normal in a design process, that you use the improv rules of yes and instead of saying no. And it turned out that the 10 papers that we had actually didn't conflict with each other, but could be brought together into a more holistic concept. And so this map became the guide for what we started to build out in terms of both product, but also business model. So then when you get to deliver, it's really design is an iterative process. I think that's something to really think about. The Ozai of today looks nothing like Ozai 6 months ago, looks nothing like the Ozai in that storyboard picture, or it looks very different. So deliver is about learning and finding out more of what you don't know so that you can go back into that discover process. So I have back on that screen, we will achieve X by doing Y and make money by Z that I brought up before. And then we're launching on the right side, the critical incertitudes. So there may be in a new concept, thousands of things you don't know, but you need to ask yourself, if X isn't true, will the concept fall apart? And that's where you want to start building your prototypes. So for Uber, it's would people get in the car with strangers as opposed to a taxi? So that's when you want to start creating low fidelity prototypes. So most people, when they think about prototypes, especially scientists, engineers, you think about like 3D printing a model of something. For me, a prototype is just a way to test an answer to a question. We organize them through the balanced breakthrough model, which is viability, desirability, and feasibility. You need to be in the sweet spot where all three overlap. And so we start our prototyping looking at our most critical uncertainty in each one of these three categories. So in terms of viability, this was where we had kind of our biggest questions of, will people be willing and able to pay for this solution? Especially because the returns aren't immediate. To the small business, record keeping doesn't pay off, maybe even for several years down the line. In terms of desirability, so viability is, can we make money? Can we make impact? Can we be sustainable? Desirability is, do people want this? So design process really focuses on this desirability piece, but we still had uncertainties. And mostly it was this question around, should the coach be someone known in the community, or should it be this persona that we're creating, and who would people rather listen to? Feasibility is, does this technology exist? Does my team have the capability to make this technology? Can we launch it? For us, it was really important to see how much of the robust feature set of OZE would be lost if we had to also have a solution that could work offline. So that is the very, very rapid overview of the main components of design thinking. I saw lots of questions come in before the session about, can I apply design thinking to industrial companies? Can I bring it to nonprofits? And so just wanted to talk about, kind of 5 quick keys that can help you bring design thinking into any organization that you're working with. So start small, bring some tools into the normal processes. So maybe have everyone go and talk to one user and then come back and at a meeting, have people tell stories about their meeting with that user. The second is to build champions within your organization and get them trained up, get them tools, have them learn the processes, because design thinking is different. You have uncertainty in it throughout the whole process. When the aperture is expanding, people get very nervous because it doesn't feel like you're working towards anything. So having people in the organization who have gone through it can be really helpful. 3 is find something that you've tried to fix before but haven't been able to, because in that place, people will be more willing to try new tools and new processes. The 4th is acknowledge that it's uncomfortable. So don't just say like, this is innovation, this is what you should be doing. I don't understand why you don't like it, why it doesn't feel natural. But acknowledge that new processes are hard and that this is going to be stretching and growing for everybody, and that's where you'll come up with the best ideas. And then finally, be visible. So demonstrate the wins that you have. I did a prototype for a large client, and we actually filmed our entire kind of prototyping experience and then edited it down to a 3-minute video that was shared throughout the organization, so that people, even if they weren't part of it, they felt included and it didn't feel so foreign and theoretical for them. So that is your quick introduction to design thinking and how I've used it to launch a design-led company in West Africa. And now I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thank you, Megan. As a reminder to our participants, you can type in your questions into the Q&A panel. And while we're doing that, I will tell you a little bit about some upcoming MIT Sloan Alumni online events. On September 27th, Paul Hellman, SM81, will discuss When Leaders Speak, How to Get Heard, Get Remembered, and Get Results. He is a speaker, author, and consultant, and he regularly leads MBA workshops at MIT Sloan during the innovation period. And also on October 25th, we'll hear from Brad Feld, an alum from the class of 1988, and he will discuss Give First, a new approach to entrepreneurship and mentorship. So you can learn more about these sessions and register by visiting the MIT Sloan Alumni online website. Also, you can watch your email inboxes for our revamped monthly virtual programs digest, which includes additional opportunities to engage with MIT from wherever you are in the world. And so we will take our first question for Megan. And Megan, one of the things that stood out in your presentation is you're certainly pulling together so many disciplines. So you've studied design thinking, you have certainly a mastery of the business practices, but also there's some psychology here or sociology. You even mentioned improv. So for you as a leader, how do you marshal your teams to also be creative and pull on all of these disciplines to the success of your company?
I thank you for that. That's a great question. I think part of it goes all the way back to when you're building your team. I always look for people who are cross-disciplinary. That doesn't mean that they have to be as weird as I was and study finance and theater in college, but maybe someone who their hobbies tend to be more creative. They like in West Africa, drumming and dance is a big part of culture. So someone who's delved into that world. And so find people who believe like I do in the power of intersectionality. I think then once you have your team, it's important to not really put labels on things. So I don't necessarily, when I'm designing a workshop, I don't say, oh, this activity comes from the business world because I really need a map of people's cash inflows and outflows. And this activity I actually used to do at theater rehearsal because I'm trying to understand the emotional components of what it feels like to fail in business. You just say, what are we trying to learn and how can we learn it? And then pulling from the diverse toolkits that everybody in the room has.
Great, thank you. And certainly woven throughout your presentation, and I'm sure your experience in West Africa, you spoke a lot about building relationships and humanizing the problems and the solutions, and really drawing the local folks, local entrepreneurs into that process. I think you mentioned in Accra. So maybe what were some of the cultural barriers that you faced, and what advice would you have for other entrepreneurs who are operating internationally?
Sure. I think one of the beauties of design thinking is that it's more of a skeleton that you fill in with the culture that you're operating in. So it doesn't necessarily feel like it's at odds with any particular culture, but some of the things that we look out for. So for example, that board game that I showed during research, and people on my team were saying like, oh, no, Megan, like we are bringing in business people. We cannot waste their time with games. And then they try it and they realize that they've learned a lot about it. And so, or learned a lot through it. And so I think it's talking with both your research participants and with your team, explaining what you're trying to do and giving them kind of like a easy out and a voice in the process. So say, I really want to try this game out. I know it might feel like a waste of time. Let's do it once and then check in at the end and see if this is something we want to keep doing. And then with the participants saying like, this might feel really silly, but can you just do it for me? I really appreciate the time and engagement in this process. And then that game people get so into because it is such an emotional game. I think also there's no substitute for being on the ground and embedding yourself in the community. So that was something that is what the Peace Corps does. So I lived in a hut with a family for over 2 years, completely off the grid, no electricity, no running water. And that allowed me to really build empathy and build local relationships. I'm not saying that everyone needs to do that, but when you are going into a new area where you're trying to get to know the culture and the people, don't stay in the 5-star hotel. Like stay in an Airbnb with a family. Don't eat at the expat restaurants. Like, find safe street food and eat it and talk to people, talk with your taxi drivers, and really make sure that you're not coming in as a foreigner, but you're coming in as somebody who wants to engage with the community.
Great, thank you. We had one follow-up question, and since you're talking about the game you designed, is there a place where our viewers can learn more about that game, or maybe you could say a little bit about what kind of insights you took away from that specifically?
So where the game came from is we were thinking about the way that we're designing the app. We want people to have short-term goals that they're working towards so that we can help reward them for those goals. So we're actually not fully figured it out yet, but we're looking at badging systems, rewards, milestones. And our team really had a hard time figuring out like what exactly are the milestones, the badges, like what feels like it's worthy of celebration versus table stakes. And especially because our users come from diverse age groups and diverse industries, it's really hard to say like when you get your first recurring revenue, then you've made it. And so that's the impetus for the game, was to actually start out with trying to figure out what are milestones. So the actual, I can go back to the picture of it. You can still see my screen?
Yep.
Great. So you see that there are typed words, there are blank spaces, and then there are typed boxes with lines on them. If you roll an even number, you get to move forward. And if you land on a box with words, you got to pick an emoji out of our emoji pile and put it on that square and then talk about why you chose that particular emoji. If you landed on a blank one or one with a line through it, you actually had to fill it in. So this is laminated and we had dry erase markers. And you were asked to look at the box before it and look at the box after it and fill in what you thought in your business would go there. We do a lot of thinking out loud, so people couldn't just write something, they had to talk about it. And then if somebody else lands on that square, then it's treated as a square with words, and they put an emoji down and talk about how they would feel to meet that milestone. And then if you get an odd, you go backwards, and we never give them enough time to finish. So we learn a lot about kind of how people deal with frustrations and triumphs and hitting the ladders that have you go forward or fall back. We always facilitate a conversation after it. Something that I think the strongest insight that we gained from this game is people did not really care so much about the boxes at the end, the boxes towards the finish, but they were desperate to have somebody tell them what box is next. Like they hated landing on the blank squares, and it wasn't a lack of creativity. It was in their business life, they already feel so much uncertainty. And so instead of really setting up this elaborate milestones and badging system, we're actually trying to develop a system that has short-term goals based on your past performance. This is what should be happening this week. And then using data analytics to refine the goals that we set for them so that sometimes they achieve them and sometimes they don't.
Great. And I love the point you make about building comfort with that uncertainty. And so this relates, it's actually a great segue to one of the other questions that came in. Within a company, perhaps that is maybe not traditionally very innovative or is risk averse. How do you as a leader kind of socialize that and make it okay to feel that uncertainty?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was an innovation consultant working for Doblin, my specialization was B2B industrial companies, mostly Six Sigma corporations. And Six Sigma is the antithesis of design thinking, right? Because it's all about removing uncertainty and variability from the process, whereas design thinking, you're constantly iterative and opening the aperture and adding more ideas. And you're having a problem that you're starting from, not a solution that you're aiming towards. I think a couple of things. I think the first thing is just really is to start small or start on the fringes. So because design thinking has kind of reached the point where in every large organization, somebody has heard of it and somebody at least is interested in innovation. They're willing to, in whatever span of control that they have, be the guinea pig to experiment with the design process. So oftentimes when I would go into large corporations to bring these kinds of practices, we wouldn't start in the business unit that was generating the profits for the company. we'd start in that business unit where people would say like, oh, they haven't made money in 6 quarters and we should just spin them off. And it lowered the stakes for everyone because no one expected it to be successful. And then when it was, document that and socialize it. And we do a lot of co-creation within OZE, within Dare to Innovate, but also in large corporations, a lot of co-creation workshops so that individuals can point to a piece of a solution, even if they're not in it for the whole long process, and say, oh, that was that was my idea. And then they're more likely to then start championing the solution going forward. And it's like a ball rolling downhill. So you just need to get it going a little bit and then it can take off. But definitely talk about the difference and talk about the discomfort and talk about how it's probably going to feel and be different than what you typically do.
Great, thank you. And this is a bit of the opposite of that. So the next question is, what are the weaknesses of human-centered design or design thinking? Or are there certain sectors where you have seen this be less effective? Or maybe kind of, what are the pitfalls that someone might encounter?
Sure. So this might feel like it's a bit in contradiction to what I just said, but you see a little bit of, let's sprinkle some innovation on top of what we do, or let's add a bit of design thinking into our process, which I think is good for starting to build muscles, but it's not going to take you over the finish line. But because if you saw this board game on the table in a corporate office, you would immediately have something going off like, oh, we're doing something different, we're being creative, we're being innovative. And that sometimes feels like enough. And so you don't take it all the way into the finish line. So I think that's one of the pitfalls. I think the other pitfall is that it is iterative. And it might, take a lot more time and a lot more research and a lot more leadership management buy-in to get things done that maybe you didn't need such a robust process to solve. So you talk about different types of innovation. There's this like kind of core innovation, which I like to say is like the Share a Coke campaign. Like they just kind of changed their packaging a little bit. They changed their messaging a little bit, and they positioned Coke different. It didn't take any new capabilities. It didn't take any new manufacturing processes. It felt, Coke's formula was still Coke's formula. That you don't necessarily need a big process like this to do. You can fall back on some of your more traditional processes. But if you want to completely, if you want to open yourself up to solutions that your own users don't know exist, then you're going to have to go and invest yourself in a process such as this one. I don't know how much that covered the pitfalls and challenges. I'd also just say, I think human-centered design relies more on people than processes. So that can also be a difficulty in organizations, because with Six Sigma, you send your people out to training, you have these very detailed books, you have these very detailed processes, B comes after A and C comes after B. Design thinking, you really need strong leadership with a creative mind who is willing to kind of shepherd the whole process, as well as bring in the diverse voices.
Thank you. So this is switching gears a little bit, but you're currently a student at Harvard pursuing your MPA. And where do you see that fitting in for the near future, and how are you learning and applying that as well as your Sloan education to what you're doing with OZE?
Yeah, that's a great question. OZE, I don't typically go into kind of the economic theory behind the platform. But what we're trying to do with OZE is solve market failures. So one of them is the problem of lemons that you think of as a used car problem also exists in microfinance, and as well as adverse selection. So interest rates are really, really high in microfinance because it's really expensive to assess a small business that doesn't keep records. And so once this is your interest rate, anyone less risky is going to say, well, I'm not taking out that loan and drop out. So then your pool of people are those who are more risky than that interest rate. And so then the interest rate has to go up to account for that risk. So there are market failures such as that one that we're trying to solve with OZE, and correcting market failures is typically the purview of government. And so trying to figure out from a policy side how we can fit this piece of technology into solutions that governments are working on as well. So our first enterprise client is actually the government of Ghana, who is using OZE in order to manage their portfolio of small businesses that they're supporting. And so I think we sit kind of at that sweet intersection of business, technology, and policy. And so that's why I'm doing both degrees.
Great. And you mentioned working with local government. So what primary differences do you see between individual entrepreneurs and kind of very boots on the ground versus maybe a more bureaucratic system? Or do you have comments or thoughts on deploying in those different areas?
The difference that I feel on a day-to-day basis isn't private enterprise versus government. In Ghana, our government partners actually moved faster than our financial institution partners, which did surprise me. I think it's just the difference you see in all businesses doing direct-to-consumer sales. While we are a pure B2B company, I think of a sole proprietorship, the sale process looks more as a consumer sale versus doing enterprise level sales. So a small business owner will see a Facebook ad for our app, say, hey, I might as well give it a try, download it and start using it. The governments need their legal counsel to review our MOUs. So the timeframes are different. I think the appetite for risk is higher at the small business level because they do feel so trapped and they're willing to try anything, whereas government, their incentives aren't always aligned with ours in the same way that, we are a for-profit business. We are, we're not purely profit maximizing, but we are definitely a for-profit business. Our investors are all pure play technology investors, are not impact investors. And why I think it works is because a small business owner will only keep using our product as long as our product helps them grow their profits, and then we can share in some of the wealth we're creating. And so our incentives are completely aligned. Governments don't necessarily have the same rapid feedback cycle. They might not actually want to know if what they're doing is working because transparency isn't always helpful. So it's, I would say, both a timing thing and the alignment of incentives that makes the two pieces a bit different.
Thank you. I just wanted to share a quick comment. We had a submission from a classmate of yours who said, "You go, girl." So you're doing great work out in the world. So again, I think I said to you before, but your infectious enthusiasm is amazing, and it's clearly showing up in your work. And so we're proud of you from the Sloan School and for all the great work that you're doing in the world. But
thank you.
So I guess one quick question, or it may not be quick, but as we come to a close, if you had a crystal ball and you're looking into the future, maybe 1 year or 2 years, kind of what's next? What are your hopes and dreams for OZE and for your work? Maybe you can share a little bit there.
Yeah, so being an early stage entrepreneur, still existing in a year would be fantastic. But what we're trying to do by the end of this year is to get our monthly active user range in the 70,000 individual realm. So in terms of what the company will look like, we'll have a more robust product offering. We'll have partnerships with institutions and banks and large corporations. But I believe we will only achieve that if we get to a point where we can actually prove to a small business that using our platform will make them more profitable and increase their likelihood of getting appropriate capital injected into their business. So a year from now, I want the small business owners who are on our platform or who will be on our platform by the end of the year to be able to look back at the their start of using Oze and say, like, things have changed for me. My business operates better because I'm using this platform. And then I think any of like the lovely enterprise metrics of users and revenue and expansion will come naturally if we're delivering something that truly has value to a small business owner.
Well, thank you. Megan, thank you again for sharing your experiences with our Sloan alumni community.
Of course.
And I want to thank all of our Sloan alumni and friends for joining us. To keep this conversation going over social media, you can use the hashtag SloanieChat. Following this event, you will receive a survey email as well as a link to the recording. So for all of our Sloanies watching, please fill that out and let us know your feedback and our ongoing lineup of events this fall. As always, you can reach out to us at sloanalumnionline@mit.edu. And thank you for joining us today. And Megan, thank you again. It's been wonderful having you on the program and to learn more about your company and all the great work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it. I hope everyone did as well.